The airport buzzed with its usual chaos, suitcases rolling across tile floors, boarding calls echoing through the air, kids darting ahead of weary parents, and travelers glued to glowing phone screens. But amidst the noise, the sharp, rhythmic click of polished dress shoes stood out. Colonel David Carter had arrived, and he wore his uniform with quiet pride. Rows of ribbons on his chest, the silver eagle on his shoulder gleaming under fluorescent lights. But today, his expression was different. His eyes carried weight, not from war, not from medals or memories, but from something deeper, something sacred. Out on the tarmac, a casket waited, draped in the American flag, silent, still. Inside it lay Private First Class Jason Reynolds, 21 years old, gone too soon. A son, a brother, a soldier. And now it was Colonel Carter's duty to bring him home. This wasn't just a routine mission. It wasn't a flight on a schedule. It was a promise, a sacred vow whispered by every soldier who ever took the oath. No one gets left behind. As Carter approached the airline counter, he clutched the military orders in one hand and his ID in the other. He had done this before, many times, but something in the air felt off. Heavy, tense. A storm gathering behind polite smiles and company policies. He straightened his uniform, lifted his chin, and stepped forward. He was about to carry out one of the most solemn tasks a soldier could perform. But the battle he was about to face, it wouldn't be on foreign soil. That IT wouldn't involve bullets or bombs. That IT would happen right here, under the bright, blinking lights of a civilian airport, where respect would be tested, and justice would have to fight to be heard, and the world was about to watch. The line at the airline counter moved slowly, a predictable crawl of vacationers, business travelers, and families. No one noticed him at first, just another passenger in uniform. But Colonel Carter's steps were measured, his focus sharp. He wasn't traveling for leisure. He wasn't traveling for work. He was fulfilling a sacred duty. He laid his military orders and ID on the counter. The young woman behind the desk, distracted and typing mid-conversation with her coworker, barely looked at him. Then she paused, just a second too long. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she read the paperwork. Her fingers froze on the keyboard. The buzz of conversation around them faded, only slightly, like the sudden tension that enters a room before lightning strikes. "Sir, can I see that again?" she asked, her tone tight. Carter, calm but alert, handed the documents back. He had done nothing wrong. Everything was in order. But he'd seen that look before, in foreign embassies, in back rooms where hesitation meant hidden intent. Something was wrong. She turned and whispered to another agent. The two exchanged glances, quick, uncertain. The second agent looked over. His face gave nothing away. Moments stretched. Seconds felt longer. When she returned, her smile was forced. Thin. "I'm sorry, sir, but there seems to be an issue with your ticket," she said. Carter didn't blink. "I'm escorting the remains of a fallen soldier. These documents are valid. This is an official military assignment." She lowered her gaze. "I understand, sir, but there's a security protocol in place. We can't override it." A beat of silence. "A security protocol," Carter repeated slowly, his voice even but razor-sharp. "What policy are you referring to?" The woman hesitated. "It's just policy, sir." Behind him, the line had begun to notice. A few people glanced up from their phones. A military officer in full uniform, being denied boarding, didn't happen every day. Carter squared his shoulders, refusing to step aside. "I've flown with remains before. I know the protocols. I know there's no such policy that prevents me from boarding." Her mouth opened, then closed. From the back of the room, a supervisor emerged. Mid-50s, graying at the temples, wearing the kind of corporate name tag that said he made problems disappear. "Colonel, I'm terribly sorry for the inconvenience," he began. His voice dipped in corporate charm. "But unfortunately, we have to follow protocol. Nothing personal, of course. Nothing personal." Carter clenched his jaw, keeping the fury inside. He had faced down insurgents, handled international crises. But this? This felt personal. "This isn't a vacation. It's not a business trip," he said. "This is a fallen soldier's final journey home." "I understand, sir." "No," Carter said, low and firm. "You don't." A voice from behind cut through the tension. "Do you have an issue with his military clearance?" Everyone turned. A man in his 60s, weathered face, calm eyes, and a worn USMC cap stood tall. A Marine, the kind of man who didn't speak unless it mattered. "No, sir," the supervisor replied, his confidence faltering. "It's standard protocol." The Marine let out a scoff. "I've walked through security more times than I can count. I've never seen protocol deny a soldier escorting a brother home." The murmur in the line grew louder. Phones came out. Cameras rolled. The tension thickened like fog before a storm. Another voice spoke up. "Are you serious right now? He's in uniform. This is disgusting." Someone whispered. A young woman stepped forward. "Excuse me, are they really stopping you from flying?" she asked, her voice trembling. She lifted her phone. "I'm live right now." Carter nodded. That was it. The spark. A wave of reaction rippled through the terminal. Passengers started filming. Others asked questions loudly. A woman in a denim jacket turned to her husband, shaking her head. "This isn't right," she muttered. A teenager pulled out his phone and began typing furiously. Twitter, Facebook, TikTok. The story was no longer private. It had ignited. The airline staff froze. The agent at the desk looked like she wanted to disappear. The supervisor rubbed his temple, whispering to someone behind him. Too late. A mother with a baby whispered, "It's already trending." Another man glanced at his phone. "It's blowing up. CNN just posted it." Still, Carter didn't move. He stood his ground, steady, silent, a soldier on the front line. Only this battlefield had tiled floors and boarding zones. Then, as if summoned by the pressure, a second man appeared. Sleek navy suit, sharp eyes, corporate ID clipped to his pocket. He walked briskly to the counter. "Colonel Carter," he said with practiced poise, "we deeply apologize. There appears to have been a miscommunication. We'll be getting you on your flight immediately. First-class accommodations, of course." Carter didn't flinch. "If this hadn't gone public, would I still be standing here?" Silence. "You don't need to answer," Carter said. "Everyone here already knows." The crowd murmured again. Carter straightened his uniform. "I don't need first class. I need respect. And so does the soldier I'm escorting." He wasn't asking for anything special, just decency, dignity, honor. And in that moment, under the bright white lights of an airport terminal, the airline realized they had made the wrong enemy. The terminal had changed. What was once just a space for departures and arrivals had become something else entirely. Charged, silent, alive with a collective tension. Every eye now followed Colonel Carter, not because he demanded attention, but because he held his ground. And the people knew something wasn't right. A man in a hoodie leaned closer to his friend. "He's escorting a fallen soldier, man. Why are they stopping him?" A middle-aged woman in a red scarf shook her head, lips pressed tight. "He's in uniform. That should mean something." A teenager held up his phone, streaming live. "Guys, this is happening right now. Military colonel being denied boarding while escorting someone's son home. Share this." The videos spread like wildfire. Within minutes, hashtags trended. Screens lit up across the terminal, not with flight updates, but with outrage. The ripple had become a wave, and then came the voice again. The Marine that he stepped forward, slow and deliberate, as if every inch of movement held weight. "I've seen a lot of things," he said, voice rough but steady. "I've fought for this country. I've buried brothers. But this," his jaw clenched, "this is a disgrace." He turned toward the supervisor, his eyes steel. "What are you doing? Hiding behind a policy? That man is doing something none of us ever want to do." Silence gripped the air. Even the usual intercom announcements seemed to fade. A baby cried in the distance. No one moved. The supervisor looked cornered, eyes darting, sweat now visible at his brow. and then more voices joined in. This man deserves to be on that plane. Let him fly. This is his country, too. A man in business attire, briefcase at his side, took a step forward. This isn't protocol. This is cowardice. The airline agent behind the counter typed blindly at her keyboard, her hands visibly shaking. The situation had spiraled beyond customer service. This was now a public reckoning. And then, the crowd parted slightly. A young woman stepped forward, barely in her 20s. Her hands trembled as she raised her phone. I didn't want to get involved, she began, voice soft. But I can't just stand here. She turned the camera to her face. If this is what we do to our soldiers, if this is how we treat someone honoring the dead, then we've lost something bigger than a flight. We've lost our humanity. A beat of silence. Then, applause. Scattered at first. Then more. People clapped. Not for drama, not for defiance, but for decency. Carter stood motionless, his expression unreadable. But inside he felt it. Not triumph, not relief, something deeper, something sacred. Respect was rising, not from the system, but from the people. And the airline couldn't stop it. The Marine stepped closer to Carter. We've got your back, Colonel, he said quietly. Carter nodded once. Appreciate it, brother. And then came the first explosion. Not from sound, but from a headline. A young man near the window gasped. It's on Twitter. Major veteran group just shared the video. He turned the screen for others to see. Bold letters lit up the feed. U.S. Army colonel denied flight while escorting fallen soldier. Outrage grows. Hashtag let him fly. Phones dinged with notifications. Screens refreshed by the second. It was no longer an airport issue, it was national. Veterans organizations, news outlets, and high-profile figures began to take notice. The narrative had slipped completely out of the airline's control. Behind the counter, the original agent disappeared into a back room, her face pale. She wasn't coming back to handle boarding. She was seeking damage control. The supervisor stood awkwardly, his voice drowned out by whispers, recordings, tweets, and murmurs of disbelief. Someone yelled, "Too late!" Another, "Where's the apology?" And then, the loudspeaker crackled. Attention passengers. Flight 237 to Phoenix is delayed due to unforeseen circumstances. Groans filled the air, but most didn't care. They weren't thinking about takeoff anymore. They were watching him. Colonel Carter, standing tall, carrying not just the memory of a fallen soldier, but now the weight of every eye in that terminal. A woman with a child stepped forward. My husband served, she said softly. If it were him, I'd want someone to fight like this. Then something rare happened. A chain reaction of support. Passengers began speaking directly into their phones. I'm here at the airport. This isn't okay. My grandfather was a Marine. He'd be disgusted. This colonel is standing for someone who can't speak anymore. We have to speak up. The resistance had become a movement. And the airline, now it had to answer to more than a single soldier. It had to answer to the people. The noise in the terminal had shifted, no longer idle chatter, but a charged murmur, like thunder rumbling before the storm breaks. People weren't just witnesses anymore. They were participants in something bigger than a travel delay. And at the center of it all stood Colonel David Carter, calm, still, and unshakably dignified. But under the surface, pressure built like a ticking clock. The supervisor stood awkwardly behind the counter, trying to project control. But control had slipped through his fingers 10 minutes ago, drowned in hashtags, live videos, and the fury of a watching crowd. Every second that passed only deepened the hole they were digging. He tapped his earpiece, whispered into it, then disappeared into the back, and then silence. The kind of silence that doesn't just fall, but lands. Carter didn't move. He knew this kind of stillness. The kind that came before a breach, before a bullet, before everything changed. A woman nearby shifted her weight, nervously clutching her purse. A man in a business suit whispered to his wife, "They think this will go away. It won't." At that moment, a young woman near the window gasped. He's trending again. Look. She turned her phone screen around. A tweet in bold, capital letters burned across it. Airline denies flight to Army Colonel escorting fallen soldier. Is this America now? Underneath, the number of shares, comments, and furious reactions was climbing by the second. More people began whispering. More phones came out. A teenage boy turned to his dad. This has like thousands of shares already. Minutes ago, it was just a dozen. And then bing. An alert on someone's screen. Then another. And another. A major national news outlet had picked up the story. Front page. Breaking news. The headline was direct. Disgrace at the gate. Military escort denied. Public outcry erupts. The photo accompanying it. Carter standing tall at the counter. And behind him, a line of civilians, faces filled with disbelief, defiance, and solidarity. The emotional weight in the terminal was now undeniable. People weren't just angry. They were heartbroken. A woman in her 50s wiped a tear from her eye. That boy he's bringing home. He was someone's everything. A man in a construction vest stepped closer to Carter. Sir, I don't know what else to do but stand here with you. Carter gave a small, respectful nod. Standing is enough. And then movement. The agent behind the desk returned, pale, shaken, trying to avoid every camera pointed in her direction. She opened her mouth, but before a single word left her lips, a second figure appeared beside her, a man in a tailored navy blue suit. His steps were brisk, deliberate, airline badge pinned perfectly. Corporate emergency mode. Activated. He scanned the terminal. His eyes flicked to Carter, then to the Marine, then to the line of civilians recording every breath of this mess. Colonel, he began smoothly, we deeply regret what has happened here today. There appears to have been a miscommunication. That word. Carter's gaze hardened. He'd heard it in too many rooms where people tried to clean up mistakes without taking responsibility. Miscommunication was code for we got caught. We're working to resolve the issue, the man continued. We will personally escort you to the gate. First class, of course. No further delay. Carter didn't flinch. I'm not here for comfort, he said quietly. I'm here for a soldier who can't speak for himself anymore. If no one had recorded this, if no one spoke up, would I still be standing here? The man hesitated, just long enough. You don't need to answer, Carter said. Everyone here already knows. A few people in the crowd murmured. He's right. And then, like lightning cutting through a storm cloud, the airport loudspeaker came alive. Attention passengers. Due to unforeseen circumstances, Flight 237 to Phoenix will be delayed. We apologize for the inconvenience. A few scattered groans echoed, but no one cared about their delay anymore. They cared about this. The man in the suit cleared his throat. Sir, we understand your concerns and... He stopped. A uniformed airport security officer appeared beside him, silent but serious, and handed him a phone. The suit frowned, then read the screen. His face paled. The Marine, arms crossed, arched a brow. Problem? The man didn't answer, but the headline on the screen said it all. Veterans Coalition files formal complaint against Airline after escort denied. Beneath it, a video clip, footage from the terminal. Real-time outrage, real consequences. And then another figure entered. Not in a business suit, not in airport security, but in military uniform. His posture was sharp. Authority radiated off him like heat from concrete. His ID badge identified him as Major Thomas Beckett, Department of the Army. He strode past the counter like he owned the air itself. Colonel Carter, he said, voice crisp. The Pentagon has been informed. Your new transport is waiting. You will not be flying commercial. He turned to the airline rep. This is no longer your operation. The corporate man stammered. We were just about to. You were just about to cover your tracks. Beckett cut in an raised voice. Just pure steel. He turned back to Carter. Private military flight. Fully secured. Ready when you are. Carter exhaled. Not relief. Just resolve. The mission was back on course. But the fallout for the airline? It was only just beginning. When Major Thomas Beckett appeared, the terminal shifted once more, this time with reverence. His uniform was immaculate, his boots polished, his stride unbroken. But it wasn't the uniform or his rank that made people part for him. It was something deeper, something sacred. Authority wrapped not in fear, but in honor. He didn't need to announce who he was. Everyone already knew. Beckett stopped in front of Colonel Carter and extended his hand. "Colonel," he said firmly, "we've been briefed. The Pentagon is watching." Carter returned the handshake, his grip strong. He didn't ask how the major got there so fast. The military didn't stall when one of its own was disrespected. It moved. Beckett turned to the stunned airline representative, whose polished shoes now seemed far too small for the moment. "This matter is no longer yours to resolve," Beckett said, voice crisp. The airline man tried to recover. "Sir, we sincerely apologize. We've made arrangements. First class." Beckett's stare cut like glass. "You've done enough." The rep paused, shoulders tightening. His carefully prepared PR phrases now useless in the presence of something he couldn't manage. "Truth." Carter stepped forward, his voice even, measured. "Major, I appreciate the swift response, but I need to ask, what changed? Why now?" Beckett's expression didn't flicker. "Because someone pressed record, and someone else chose to stand." Carter glanced at the crowd. Dozens of people still held their phones high, streaming, filming, documenting. The Marine gave him a silent nod of respect. The woman with the baby offered a soft smile. The teenager raised a fist. These weren't just onlookers anymore. They were witnesses. They were advocates. They were why the mission was back on track. Beckett took a step closer. "You and Private Reynolds will not be flying commercial. A private military aircraft is waiting at a secure terminal. Your orders have been updated." Carter nodded. "Understood." Behind them, the airline staff stood frozen, silent, powerless. And for the first time since the beginning of it all, they looked ashamed. The supervisor who had first denied the flight had reappeared, now hovering behind the counter like a man watching a building collapse in slow motion. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing left to say. Carter turned once more to the Marine. "Appreciate you, brother." The Marine gave a small, respectful tilt of the head. "We look out for our own." Then Carter turned to the crowd. "I thank you all," he said, his voice deep and clear. "Not just for speaking up, but for not walking away." And they hadn't they'd stayed. Because it mattered. Because he mattered. And because Private First Class Jason Reynolds, lying silent under the stars and stripes on a waiting tarmac, deserved better. Carter adjusted his uniform, squared his shoulders, and walked. Not toward Gate 23, not toward first-class service, but toward something far greater: justice, honor, completion. The crowd watched in silence as he exited the terminal, flanked by Major Beckett. The clicking of his boots against the floor echoed, steady and strong. Every step was a tribute, every movement a reminder. This wasn't just about a flight. It was about dignity, and the story, far from over. Because outside that airport, the world was watching. In the hours that followed, news networks picked up the full footage. Major outlets broke down the timeline. The hashtags grew louder. Politicians released statements. Veteran groups mobilized. And for the airline, the reckoning began. Their stock dropped. Press releases were flooded with backlash. A formal complaint was filed by a coalition of military advocacy groups for violation of service member protections. Calls for boycotts surged. CEOs scrambled. Apologies were issued. Employees placed on leave. But the damage was done, and still, Carter didn't gloat. He didn't seek vengeance. He simply completed his mission. He escorted Private First Class Jason Reynolds home, standing at attention as the flag-draped casket was received by a grieving mother, a broken father, and a community wrapped in silence. He saluted. Then he stepped back, not for recognition, not for the cameras, but because that's what soldiers do. They serve, they carry the burden, they bring home the fallen. And then they move on quietly, honorably. Carter didn't need headlines. He needed respect. And now, so did the world. The airline thought it would all fade away. A few apologies, a polished press release, maybe a half-hearted statement from the CEO read off a teleprompter in front of a sterile blue backdrop. That's how these things were usually handled. Neatly, quietly, forgotten by next week. But not this time. Not after this. Because what started as a security policy excuse unraveled into a national reckoning. A public display of what happens when dignity is denied, and people refuse to stay silent. By the next morning, the video had been viewed over 12 million times. Major news outlets ran the headline across every platform. Airline denies flight to U.S. Army Colonel escorting fallen soldier. Outrage erupts nationwide. Veterans groups released coordinated statements condemning the airline's behavior, calling it an egregious failure of decency. Several high-profile politicians, Republican and Democrat alike, stood on the same side for once, demanding accountability and new legislation to protect military escorts during duty-related travel. But the biggest hit wasn't moral. It was financial. Within 48 hours, the airline stock dropped nearly 11%. Investors panicked. Social media flooded with screenshots of deleted flight reservations. Influencers called for boycotts. Military families swore off the airline permanently. "We trusted you to honor our heroes," one post read, "and you failed when it mattered most." And then came the lawsuit. A coalition of military advocacy groups, legal advisors, and former service members filed a formal complaint against the airline. The charges included discrimination, neglect of service protocols, and failure to uphold federal protections for military personnel in transit. In the complaint, one line stood out: cold, precise, and devastating. Respect should never be optional. The airline scrambled. Emergency meetings were held. PR consultants were flown in. Internal emails leaked, showing panic, confusion, and attempts to rewrite the sequence of events. But the internet had receipts. The footage was too clear. The truth was too raw. The CEO finally made an appearance on national television. Hair perfectly combed, tie straight, face trained in apology. "This was a regrettable misunderstanding," he said, voice measured, eyes heavy. But the public wasn't buying it, because it wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a moment where humanity failed, and millions watched it happen. The airline announced that the employees involved had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. But people weren't interested in scapegoats. They wanted change. They wanted policy. They wanted a reason to trust again. And while the airline fought fires, Colonel Carter continued his mission. Far from the flashing cameras, away from hashtags and headlines, he stood quietly by as Private First Class Jason Reynolds was received by his family. The mother wept. The father trembled. Carter remained still. Not because he was cold, but because in moments like this, there is no right thing to say. There is only presence. Only honor. He saluted as the flag was folded. Handed over with trembling hands, he offered no speeches, no sound bites. He simply fulfilled the promise. And then, he stepped back, his duty done. Meanwhile, the fallout rippled further. Veterans across the country began sharing their own stories of delayed military flights, of being bumped from seats in uniform, of being ignored, dismissed, forgotten. The story had unlocked something buried deep, and now it surged forward, unstoppable. Talk shows hosted veterans for interviews. Journalists traced the airline's policies, finding gray areas and weak protections for active duty escorts. Military lawyers began drafting proposed amendments to federal transportation law. For once, the outrage was not fleeting. It was focused. A few days later, a letter was released, signed by over 100,000 civilians and military families. It demanded that airlines nationwide adopt the Honor Flight Pledge, a code of conduct ensuring that any active-duty military personnel escorting remains would be guaranteed priority boarding, zero delay, and a full explanation of any complications, in writing, immediately. Within the week, 3 competing airlines signed on. The original airline, they were still reviewing the proposal, still hiding behind red tape, still trying to survive the storm they created. But the tide had already turned, Because what had happened in that terminal wasn't just an inconvenience, that IT was a failure of basic humanity. And the people remembered. They remembered the Marine who stepped forward, the teenager who recorded the moment, the mother with the stroller who whispered, "This isn't right," the young woman who said, "We've lost our humanity," and the colonel who never raised his voice, who never lost his temper, who didn't need to. Because dignity doesn't shout, IT stands still, IT endures, IT salutes in silence, while the world burns around it. When the dust finally settled, the headlines faded, and the comment sections went quiet, one truth remained. This wasn't just a story about a flight, IT was a story about respect. IT was a reminder, loud and unignorable, that honor should not depend on trending hashtags, press pressure, or public embarrassment. It should be automatic, instinctive, the default. Colonel David Carter didn't ask for the spotlight. He didn't shout. He didn't protest. He stood tall, calm, and resolute. Not because it was easy, but because it was right. He carried the weight of a fallen brother. He faced disrespect with discipline. And in doing so, he reminded an entire nation what real strength looks like. Strength isn't always loud. IT doesn't need cameras. IT doesn't come from position or privilege. IT comes from purpose. And Colonel Carter had a purpose greater than himself. From a personal perspective, I want to say this. It's easy to scroll past injustice. To tell ourselves it's not our business, or someone else will speak up. But what happened in that terminal proves something powerful. When ordinary people choose to stand, extraordinary change can follow. IT was the Marine's quiet courage, the young woman's shaky voice, the teenager's live stream, the mother's whispered truth, the crowd's refusal to look away. These weren't politicians. They weren't celebrities. They were us. People just trying to catch a flight, who caught a moment and decided to do something with it. That's what gives this story its strength. That's what makes it matter. So what is the lesson? It's that silence isn't neutral. That dignity should never be up for debate. That service doesn't end when the uniform comes off, and respect shouldn't start only when the camera turns on. We live in a world that's busy, noisy, and often numb to compassion. But moments like this, they wake us up. They ask us, would you have spoken up? Would you have recorded? Questioned? Stood still with him? And more importantly, will you do it next time? Because there will be a next time. There will be another moment when someone is quietly wronged. When policy is used as a shield instead of a solution. When a uniform is worn, but not honored. And when that time comes, I hope we all remember this story, not for the outrage, but for the response. For the people who proved that doing the right thing isn't just noble, it's contagious. Understand, sir, and if you're reading this, feeling that emotion rise in your chest, good. That means you're human. That means you care. That means the story did what it was meant to do. Because Private First Class Jason Reynolds deserved to go home with dignity. And thanks to Colonel Carter and the voices of strangers, he did. Let that be the takeaway. Let that be the legacy. If you found yourself moved by this story, if you felt your heart beating a little faster while reading, if you believe that honor still matters, that service should be sacred, and that ordinary people can change the course of injustice, then you're in the right place. This isn't just a channel for stories, that it's a space for truth, character, and reminders of who we are at our best. We tell stories that aren't just dramatic, but meaningful stories that don't just go viral, but go deep. Stories that you'll still be thinking about when your phone is back in your pocket. So if this resonated with you, even just a little, I want to personally invite you to subscribe to the channel. Not because we want views, but because we believe in something bigger. We believe in honoring those who serve. We believe in bringing the quiet stories forward. We believe that kindness, courage, and justice still matter, and that they deserve to be shared. By subscribing, you're not just following a channel, you're standing with a community that refuses to let silence win. You're saying, I will not look away, and I will be a voice when it counts. I will remember to owe everyone who watched, listened, shared, and stood up for what's right. Thank you. And to Colonel Carter, wherever you are, thank you for showing us how to carry both the flag and our humanity. We salute you, and we promise we'll keep telling stories that deserve to be heard. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, turn on the bell for notifications, and share this video with someone who believes in doing the right thing, even when no one's watching. Because those are the stories that change the world. And, together, we're just getting started.